Hello everyone, welcome back to another Strategoi video. Ryan here with another entry in our list building concepts series. I kind of left us off at Allies and Coalition Part 1, which is unfortunate because it was supposed to be immediately followed by a Part 2 video, which ostensibly should have been the next video in this series. But that was right before the city's book leaks went live. And so that kind of changed everything that I had in the second video, and I even remade it at some point. I remember what it was. It was the pitch battle profiles, the points changed for everything, and I'd done a bunch of points, and then the city's book dropped. So I'd actually recorded that second video once or twice, actually. And then when everything with cities changed and fundamentally changed the way you use coalition, especially in order, I just kind of threw my hands up in the air and gave up. I still have plans to do a follow-up video where I do a whole other back half of it where we cover Nurgle, I think, as the coalition hub, because at this moment Nurgle is the most flexible coalition army in the game, even though it might not be wise to do so. Cities was a much better example. But it is what it is. There's some amount of value in covering that. But that's for another day. What we're doing today is we're moving on. In my tournament preparation that I've been doing, I literally yesterday did my last of 5 tournaments in a 6-week period. I think at least one of those was a 2-dayer. A 2-dayer. It might have mostly been 1-dayers, but in any case, still just every single weekend pretty much, with one Halloween weekend break where Nick and I got together and watched some horror movies with our friends. But anyway, following that, I've really spent a lot of time working on list building based off of how crucial battle tactics really are to this game. And I figured, I've learned a lot in that process, and I thought I would share a little bit of my method of approaching it in a new spin-off of the list building series called Battle Tactics. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. Alright, so we're going to be talking about a few different things here, but it's only on a few different slides. So on slide 1, we'll be talking about point scoring in general in AoS, and then some exceptions to how many grand strats and battle tactics the average battle tome has. Then on slide 2, we'll be talking about my battle tactics matrix, which I think is kind of the bulk of the message I'm trying to get through here, and then some overall considerations about that. Followed up by a slide for kind of everything in a big picture sense before we round things out. And of course, we'll have more content coming in the near and upcoming videos, hoping I can get back on a regular pace here. Before I forget though, please do share your thoughts on this in the comment section below. Like, share, subscribe, all that good YouTube stuff. It really helps boost the signal so that more people can hear this content. And we really appreciate you guys checking it out. Alright, so let's get into what we're all about here. So point scoring in AoS, for those that are a little rusty, or for even those that just, haven't thought about it from this perspective before, we have 2 different ways of scoring, and this is kind of from the 40K parlance here, but primaries and secondaries. The primaries are going to be your objectives, and then any other points that are coming from your specific mission. You could argue that those objectives technically come from the mission as well, because not everything's hold 1, hold 2 more. That's not like a general concept. That's something that's technically written in each battle plan. And then your secondaries, which would be your battle tactics, and I've lumped your grand strat in here because that's something you have to choose and is independent of the mission, and has to do with list building more than the primaries do. Obviously, if you know what missions you're playing at a tournament, then you can build a list around those maps, but this video is meant to be more kind of broad. You have much more control over what your list can do with battle tactics than your objective control to some extent in how that mission's written. Obviously, the more bodies you have to spread out and go grab objectives, the better, but then they also have to be tanky enough to survive your opponents coming and trying to steal those objectives, and all of the other interplay that we have there. So certainly it does have something to do with list building, but that's going to be true on pretty much all missions. Whereas your battle tactics, you can actually write a really nice fluff list that's really like cool and different, and you don't see it, but it really isn't going to be able to pull off your battle tactics, and that's kind of what we're trying to drive home here. But let's take a quick look at what the difference is between these two different types of point scoring. So in the current GHB 23-24, which is a whole year cycle instead of the 6-monthers we've had for the previous two before this, there are, on given missions, 2 to 6 objectives. We used to have some missions in old GHBs with 8 objectives, but that's gone. Which means, in a sense, I guess it's kind of an upgrade for people that are playing less spread out armies, though they're certainly spread out enough to give people a headache if you need to be in a castle or you don't have a lot of mobility. So when I say objectives plus, this includes extra points, not just the objectives. So you have to see the individual missions, the battle plans for that. But for example, with Geomantic Pulse, you get 2 points for the Pulse objective itself as it keeps moving through the game. 1 point for just anything, controlling any objective, even if it's not on or adjacent to the Pulse. And then 1 point each for objectives that are adjacent to that pulse. So there's a big swing. You can have 1 point in that mission on turn 1 as a max. We're excluding battle tactics for this. So 1 primary point up to on 3rd and 4th turn, you could be getting the Nexus plus obviously an objective. That's 3 points, and then 1 each for the side. So that's 5 points. So it can be quite swingy depending on the mission. But the standard mission is just hold 1, hold 2, hold more. The max points per round, what I was just kind of alluding to here, is technically it is possible to get 0 objective points, even if you're standing on things or your army's amazing, you've tabled someone, just because it could be like limited resources, everything could be gone, or Nexus collapse, everything could be gone for other reasons. So that would be 0 points, and the max you could get is 6, if I'm not mistaken, but I forget which mission that is. But we'll talk about battle plans in another video. Jonas and I still haven't made that part of the GHB review, but we've definitely played enough games, I think, now to be able to talk about it. So we're getting kind of a little here and there coverage of the missions, but we'll do a full video at some point, because we're not even halfway through the year, I guess, the GHB. Okay. But the average here is 3. Again, hold 1, hold 2, hold more. So 3 different points, 1 for each of those. The max points per game varies from quite widely on the different missions, from 10 from your primaries to 25. It depends on which missions. The ones that involve killing wizards, I think that's the one that's the swingiest. If you manage to kill an enemy wizard every single battle round, and you have an Antorian Locus on each of the 2, that's power flux, right? On each of the 2 objectives that you control that are on, you get quite a lot of points. You get 1 for each. Then you get 1 for a wizard, that's 3. Then you get an extra 1 each for each of the wizard guys that's on there. Yeah, so that's 5. And if you do that for 5 rounds, you're getting 25 points just on primaries, which is crazy, but that's also really hard to pull off. But that's just, the range is there for a reason, just to see what's possible. And then max objectives that are held from the start is 0 to 3. I like to put that in here because some maps you can't even start on an objective. You could move on to one, certainly, but you're not automatically holding any, so that makes it a little easier for your opponent if they take the first turn to jump on there and automatically have more, if that's an element of how scoring works. Okay, so moving on to secondaries. So this will be your battle tactics and your grand strats. So in the current GHB, we've got 8 different battle tactics that are accessible to everyone. We're not using, almost no one in match play uses the core rules ones, and then of course not from previous GHBs, General's Handbook. So anyway, with Grand Strats, I believe we have 6 of these in the book, and those Grand Strats also contribute plus 3 points at the end of the game. So this is supplemented by the fact that most battle tomes have 6 battle tactics and 4 Grand Strats, though there are exceptions, and that's what the whole bottom portion of this slide is all about. The max points per round is much more stable and less dependent on the mission, of course. It's not dependent on the mission at all. The max points per round is 2. Every single one of those missions gives you 2 points for scoring your battle tactic, and then 3 points for getting your grand strat. It'd be interesting to see if they ever came out with a mission that deviated from that kind of took some of the pressure off of battle tactics or added pressure, or to your grand strat. That could be kind of interesting, especially for like a teams event where you really want to see if you can lean into the right ones. But at the moment, it's pretty stable. So the max points you can get per game is 2 times 5 for each of the battle tactics, plus 3 for the grand strat, equaling 13. Now, if you compare that to the line to the left of this bullet point, you see that it's possible in some of those missions that you're actually getting more points, potentially, from your battle tactics and grand strat than you are from your primaries just holding objectives. Now, of course, you want to max out all of these things, but the idea in us talking about a list building video is, yeah, sure, you can fail a battle tactic here or there, but if your opponent doesn't, you're in trouble, especially if you're not way better at controlling the primaries. There's this kind of push-pull relationship between those two things, but of course, ideally, you get max points on everything, and you somehow make it so that your opponent doesn't and can't reciprocate every single turn. Double turns help a lot with that, but it's not a fail-safe, foolproof method. And so another point here, my last bullet point under secondaries, is that most armies can't score all options. Obviously, you only get one grand strat, so you should be choosing your grand strat based off of something you can actually get. And that's going to be true for a whole tournament, But your battle tactics, especially the ones in the GHB itself, and some of the ones in the book for sure, really depend on how you interact with your opponent. And some of them are keyword locked, where, for example, there's a Daughters of Cain one where you have to have Kinnerai, the Harpies. If you didn't bring those, well, you're not getting that battle tactic. Now, almost everyone brings them because of it, because it's a really easy one to get. But that's you get locked out of that entirely if you don't build for it. So you could almost see it as a tax on your list building, especially if there isn't any other added value for bringing that unit. Fortunately, there is plenty of added value in the current GHB of bringing 2 deep striking units like that. But you could see it as a tax just to help you guarantee a battle tactic. And sometimes that takes the fun out of the game, but for people that are all about making creative lists. But the kind of goal here is to see if you can shift your list building creativity a bit more in the direction of guaranteeing your battle tactics, and see if you can get some enjoyment out of making a list that's really good at that, while also enjoying writing the rest of what your list gets to do, fluff-wise, and just having fun playing a game with models you built and painted. All right, so looking down at below, we don't have to go through this super in detail, but you can just kind of skim it for yourself. I went through all of the current battle tomes and looked, including the recent battle scroll updates. Some people have got new grand strats and or battle tactics to help them kind of compete a little bit more, and even adding one can make a difference, especially if it's reasonable to get. So again, like I said, the average army has 6 battle tactics, 4 grand strats. I listed them in the opposite order here. So there's 2 armies that have more grand strats. That'd be Skaven and Big Wa. Granted, having more grand strat options doesn't necessarily mean they're quality. A lot of times the grand strats in the books are really rough, especially the ones that require you to get only at least 4 and only battle tactics out of your book version of the battle tactics. That's just like a throwaway one. So having more doesn't necessarily mean better, but it could. At least it means you've got more things GW wrote, and like you could hope that means you have more things to choose from. Big Wa has also a lot, and then you've got a bunch of armies that have 4 armies that have less, unless you want to consider non-Big Wa, so Cruel Boys, Orc War Clans, and Bone Splitters as 3 separate armies. So that would be 5 different armies that have 3 apiece for Grand Strats, and then 1 army, Flesh Eater Courts, that only has 1. Now, that's a big asterisk there, because Feck hasn't gotten, it's the only one that hasn't gotten a 3rd edition book, so they're still relying on their White Dwarf update, if I'm not mistaken, because the 2nd edition books didn't have those battle tactics and Grand Strats in them. So I wouldn't read too much into that. They're about to get a book at the end of the month, I think. And if I put money on it, I'd say they get 6 battle tactics and 4 Grand Strats. So going on to the battle tactics, same idea there. There are 3 different armies that have more. Big Wa is mainly a function of them getting a couple recent ones that aren't locked to who your general is, and that is something that's worth pointing out. Is some battle tactics are going to lock you out of by being able to get access to one, you're locked out from another. Say it says you need like an Iron Jaws general, and then the other battle tactic, one of them says Bone Splitter's general, and one of them says Cruel Boy's general. Obviously, it's not as big as it looks, but Big Wa, because it technically can do all 3 of those. One of them also includes Kragnos, if I'm not mistaken. And then they've gotten some recent ones that just say Iron Jaws units. They don't actually have to be your like main faction or whatever. So they've got a lot, and it's one of the reasons why Big Wa is so popular at tournaments right now, is because it's a lot of tools, very techy, got plenty of movement shenanigans, and lots of ways to get battle tactics. And again, the point of this whole video is to say battle tactics win you games, especially if you're equally good at controlling those primaries. Now, Stormcast and Nurgle both got a recent battle tactic that really helped them out. So even though it looks like they've got more than everyone else, that was kind of like, I think what Honest Wargamer Rob calls a pity tactic or something like that. Just to help them catch up a little bit. And then there are a number that have less, everyone else that's on this list, including, of course, Flesh Eater Quartz. All right, let's move on. So this was a lot of content, just to kind of get us all on the same page. But this is the heart of what I really want to talk about. Before you break down that chart and really stare at it, I just want to kind of give you kind of some context. When you're preparing for a tournament at like kind of a higher level Worlds kind of thing, a lot of times you make a pairings matrix, which is going to be every player, and you could do per player every mission, and at Worlds it's all 12 missions, by every you could say faction, but a lot of times you have to do it per team once you've seen the list. So that's 8 different players. So you're doing 12 missions by 8 players, and then you're doing that 20-ish times for each country that's participating. Now, that would be the most extreme version. You could even make it even more extreme and do what I've got here, but this is something that's kind of similar to that idea. So this is what I'm calling a battle tactics matrix. And you could make a simpler version of this where it's just, I've got it split per battle tactic per turn, but you could start, if this is overwhelming, start by just looking at the battle tactics you have available to yourself, and that's in these 8 from the GHB plus whatever's in your book, usually 6. Take a look at those and just give it a rating from 1 to 5, and I'll talk about the rating system in a second. Give it a rating for how likely it's going to happen in the game, just in general, agnostic of the turns, okay? But if you want to flesh it out more, you can set it up this way. And so let's go to the rating system. 5 should be reserved for things that you feel like you're going to get every single game, okay? If you set up right, or you know the way your list is built. 4 would be also perfectly acceptable. Happens most games. Sometimes it can get shut down, and we're excluding the case where you get tabled or something, right? Like that's not what we're talking about. 3 is, of course, what a 3 should be. Is you have a good chance of getting it, but there's also a good chance you won't. 2 is possible but rare, and 1 is impossible or functionally impossible. So like, I don't know, like. What would be a good one for someone like magical dominance for an army that doesn't have a wizard would be functionally impossible. Magical mayhem or well, that would be impossible. I mean, magical mayhem, where you have to kill something with wounds caused by that wizard, and that wizard only has arcane bolt as direct damage spell, and you never want to put them into combat, is functionally impossible unless they've got a unit that wizard is okay getting up close and personal with, and doing 1 to 3 mortal wounds, and assuming that they're not going to unbind your spell. So that would be pretty low. But anyway, so as you can see, kind of, I tried to picture a generic army, not necessarily any one of my armies, and try to play it out here. So what you can see is it kind of tells a story a bit too. So let's take Intimidate the Invaders, which is where you have to have more friendly units wholly outside of your territory than partially or fully within your own territory. Some missions that's harder than others, but let's say turn 1 is possible but rare. Let's say on a mission maybe that doesn't have an 11-inch deployment, but like half the field. A lot of people can't pull that off. And even on 11-inch deployment, a lot of castle armies don't want to. But they could, especially if they're trying not to bring themselves closer to the opponent for necessary reasons. But maybe that gets better over the game. So you see turn 2, I marked it as a 3, then turn 4, 3 and 4, it's a 4, and then by turn 5, you should be outside of your territory, I guess, unless you're tabled or whatever. So looking at like some other different things, like Reprisal is one of these ones that's kind of just there. It's the one that says you have to kill the unit that killed your general. Well, that's probably not happening turns 1 and 2. I mean, if you are losing your general turns 1 and 2, you're probably losing the game. Or you're just playing bad. No offense. And then even still, I only put it as high as like a 2 for turns 3, 4, and 5, because a lot of times people just don't kill your general. Especially if you don't have a grand strat that's built around keeping your general alive, like Spellcasting Savant. Maybe they don't kill it till like the end of the game, and you don't have that many units to kind of do the reprisal with. So I don't get that one off very often. I don't know how many times I've actually seen that go off, but it's not more than a couple. And then you could kind of see stories with these other ones. Magical Dominance is kind of the other way around. If you deploy correctly, this is the one where you have to get a spell off without it being unbound. A lot of people expressly choose a list where they can either teleport their wizard for later to make it more likely, or they just set up turn 1 where that wizard's kind of hanging out in the back and wholly outside of unbind range, and they do that intentionally, especially if they have control over priority. And then they just do Magical Dominance, and unless they fail that spell, but then they just cast something easy like Arcane Bolt, Mystic Shield, or use Primals or whatever. And then that gets significantly harder to do throughout the game unless they've got no heroes, or so no heroic willpower for an unbind, or no wizards, of course. So anyway, you can read through this chart yourself if you feel so inclined. This is just kind of a fictitious version of what it might be for certain armies. And you could apply this kind of way of ranking your own list building off of this. When I'm writing a list, after I've written the list, what I often do, especially if I'm taking it to a tournament, is I literally write a whole written out in prose kind of analysis of what I think, and kind of thinking out loud by typing. My chances are of getting those tactics with my list. And looking at the considerations here, I do expand that to include book tactics, because a lot of times you're going to need those book tactics. Some of these, the GHB ones, aren't the kind that you can rely on every single turn. So I said here, what I'm looking for is, like, with the book tactics, you should have a minimum of 4 or 5 rated option, a minimum of 4 or 5 rated option per turn, preferably 2 or more. What do I mean by that? Well, looking at this, just looking at the 8 that you have in the book, GHB, not your battle tome, I've only got 1 that's a 4 or 5 on turn 1. That's one of the reasons that's so important to have a wizard in the list, because if you don't get that turn 1 and they do, you're already at a deficit and you can't score max battle tactics. And keep in mind, at some tournaments, not that everyone has to be playing tournaments, but this is also about, just winning when you play at home if you want to get better at doing that. But at a lot of tournaments, they'll also kind of do strength of schedule based off of your how many battle tactics you got and whether you got your grand strat. And it can also determine, of course, if you get the same amount of victory points, who's got a minor victory. That actually happened twice to me. I got a major victory in one game and a minor victory another game at the training for the Dutch Worlds team tournament I had like a week and a half ago. But anyway, you'd preferably want to have at least 2 options that are at 4 or 5, so that you've got some backups if something gets locked out and your opponents, are clever enough to kind of keep you from getting stuff. And that's also something that's really important to know. You want to also train and think about, can my army deny people at least the 8 that everyone has? Because you don't know what army you're going up against when you go to a tournament or, whatever. And you probably shouldn't be building your list to defeat your friends. I guess do what you want, but I try not to. I try to build lists that are generically applicable to all kind of comers, if you will. But anyway, you could be thinking about the defensive way of doing this is, how can I shut these things down? And that's one of those magical dominance things. You want at least, sometimes I've been playing Gotrek, I deploy Gotrek straight up as close as possible, and a lot of people forget that he can take heroic willpower and then get an unbind. Now with primals in the mix, it makes it real hard for him to get that off, and sometimes they can deploy even further back, but if they see the Gotrek's there, or you put a cheap hero in the front that's not a wizard, it might force them, if they're aware of it, to deploy even further back, which for a lot of armies is it's not a benefit. So anyway, let's keep going with considerations. So having more turn flexibility is a plus. Obviously, what you'd like to see, the perfect battle tactic, would be where you think you can get it every single turn at a 5 guaranteed. Now, as you can see in my little illustration here, I didn't give many battle tactics a 4 every single turn, but that's, of course, taking kind of a generic army, but it's kind of all well-rounded, I guess. What you'd really want to do is start skewing so that you have at least 4 or 5 battle tactics that are like 5s if you can. And then preferably that are flexibly 5s that are 4s that can be done most turns. You'd want at least 3 turns, I think, where they're viable. And of course, in my little kind of a fake version of doing it here, we didn't really hit that. But again, if you're building a list specifically to do that, the chart should look a little more favorable. But realistically, it'll also pull some of those options away from you for the other battle tactics. So some will get stronger and more reliable, and some will get weaker. My 4th bullet point here is less reliance on your opponent is better. I especially learned this playing KO and refining the list more and more, so I could just guarantee I'm going to get full battle tactics every game without even having to interact with the opponent. There's a lot of KO stuff that involves very minimal interaction. I don't mean that it just goes off like bringing harpies on the battlefield and then you have it. There's a little bit of that, but that's not what I mean by no interaction. I mean, you're not reliant on your opponent necessarily having a unit that you can just flat out wipe. For example, this isn't a battle tactic, it's a grand strat, but Overshadow, if I'm not mistaken, is the one where you have to kill every single battle line unit from your opponent. That's really hard to do if they're playing, say, Varangard, or, other similarly tanky units, Gargants. If every unit's a battle line unit, well, you got to kill everything. So you're not getting your grand strat. Granted, that's a grand strat. But that's what I mean by interaction, where the list can also, whatever random list you get put up against can shut things down. You want to make it so that you maximize the battle tactics that even if you choose not to interact with your opponent, maybe there's still some risk it won't go off, like casting a spell or having enough CPs to teleport a boat or whatever, but you want, that's kind of the goal, the golden standard. And then finally here, you should be updating these ratings with your experience. As you grow in familiarity with your army, you should be going back and rethinking some of these things. Now, granted, if you're anything like me, you change your lists even within one army quite frequently because maybe you have a wide range of models and you want to see what everything does and get to play with all your toys. Sure. So maybe you're updating those ratings based off of the units more than you are of the experience that you had with the units you used the last time for the last tournament or whatever. But even still, the book Battle Tactics, if you stay with one army, you get to know what that army can do and what it can't do. And you start saying, well, maybe I should probably drop this one unit to put this other one in there that's going to really help me get this thing. Okay, so hopefully that's pretty clear for everyone. Again, very few slides this time, but we're covering a lot of content per slide, I think. And that brings us to our last slide. So big picture, with the Gargants here. It goes without saying that you need a reliable grand strategy. If you don't have a grand strat, you're losing 3 points, and a battle tactic is only 2. You can think of it as a super battle tactic if you want. Some books really don't have good grand strats, and then the GHB is a little rough. Even Spellcasting Savant's pretty risky, because a lot of those Antorian locuses or loci are pretty fragile by definition. So unless you've got a great bodyguard save or a great ward or something, there's definitely some risk in taking Spellcasting Savant. Okay, so my second point here is scoreable tactics largely depend on the mission. So consider doing a table per known battle plan at a tournament. If you're doing a one-dayer and you want to kind of like really do your homework, you can do that last table that I just showed you guys, but for every single mission. I don't think it's that hard to do. Now, granted, most people are going to have 8 GHB tactics plus 6 book tactics, so that puts you at 14, and then times 5 battle rounds, but it's not that hard to decide where it sits on each battle round. It's not like doing a pairings matrix with the opponent's lists, because then you have to actually understand the lists and read all their command traits, artifacts, spells, all that stuff, and know what their sub-faction does and this, that, or the other. This is just self-contained with your own army, so I wouldn't even look at it as the 5 turns really taking up much. But so you're basically doing 14 different things times 3 to 5 missions, depending on how big your tournament is. I do think that's decent homework. Also, something I've been doing recently, as per Nick's suggestion, is the night before a tournament, or maybe earlier, pulling out my table and setting up my table and practicing with especially if you've got terrain maps, and you know exactly how the terrain's going to be sitting. Obviously, your terrain's going to be a little different than that at like a tournament, but you can get close. Practice deploying and really think about your bubbles, and especially if you're a castle army or an army that really needs to be passing out buffs and stuff. And then take a photo. And maybe you'll change your mind later, but that's also a good preparation for this kind of thing. And thinking about battle tactics while we're on that. So, third point. Some tactics require first turn priority, so consider having low drops. Like I said, Magical Dominance is one of the more sensitive ones to that. And then some book battle tactics probably are too. I know, for example, KO has one called Opening Salvo, where you have to kill an enemy unit in your shooting phase. If they've got screens, it's usually doable because they're probably putting those screens out in front. Now, maybe you don't want to be a sitting duck just sitting there, but pretty easy. Now, the caveat is it has to be, you're only allowed to choose this battle tactic if no units have been destroyed thus far in the game. So if they go first and they've got a really good alpha, they can take that whole battle tactic, a really easy battle tactic, away from you. There's another one, going back to deployment, a KO one, not to talk about KO all the time, but it's my most familiar army at this point, in this GHB for sure. Where you're trying to have, you can only pick it if you have less control of less objectives than your opponent. And there's some other books that have this too. And then you have to have more than them at the end of the turn. Well, if you have turn priority, you have turn priority going in when you're deploying. You intentionally don't deploy anyone on an objective. You just outside, and then you just move people onto objectives and casually go grab that. And they're probably going to by default put one foot on at least one objective, just because if it's that kind of mission, just because that's the smart thing to do in a lot of missions. And if they don't know your battle tactics, they're not going to know that that's maybe something you have to consider. I think people playing limited resources right now will probably have been more familiar with that kind of thing. That maybe you want to not be as assertive about grabbing objectives just because you can. But anyway, you get the idea. The practicing deployment can be a big part of that, and also thinking about your battle tactics ahead of time. Fourth point, consider your allies and coalition options, to kind of tie this in with the last list building video, to fill in the gaps in your that your army's missing. Especially dependent on the GHB. You would like to think that the book battle tactics are built for your army, so you don't need to pull from allies and coalition, but I can actually think of at least one in cities where this is actually not the case. There's one in cities that says that you need to take an objective controlled by your opponent that's where every single unit that's contesting it at the end of that turn that you now control, so you couldn't have controlled it before, has to have charged and has to have a mount. Cities does have mounts, but I wouldn't say they're necessarily amazingly punchy. But you know what cities can take are fulminators, or Storm Drake Guard, or Sylvaneth Bug Riders maybe, or eels from Ideneth. You've got some options. They're all mounted, they're fast, they punch real hard, and they can steal, and it doesn't say cities a Sigmar cavalry unit or mounted unit. So that's a good way to kind of fill that in. But probably the best suggestion for everyone, because we all have Intimidate the Invaders and Surround and Destroy, especially Surround and Destroy, is if you have any access to even just allies that can teleport every single turn, or even just do it once, or even just Deep Strike. Granted, that doesn't work for Surround and Destroy until the following turn, because you have to choose the units before they've dropped, and they're not on the table to be chosen. But teleporting units like Tree Revenants, or Canine Shadowstalkers, or a Knight Zephyros, which Jonas likes to talk about as like my favorite Stormcast unit to talk about, or the Icebrow Hunter, or Pelt whatever Hunter in Ogre Maw Tribes, or find another army that has a teleport as an ally that's just like a War Scroll ability. Those units go a long way to grabbing you your guaranteed Surround and Destroy, which I'll be honest, for a lot of units is really hard. And those teleporting units, especially if they happen to be battle line like Tree Revs are, because then they can be used for Let in the Maelstrom. There's a lot of functionality there. So just consider that. And then last bullet point, I called it Real Talk Ryan time. In my old rock band I toured with in the States, baby. The guys knew me as Real Talk Ryan because a lot of times I found it hard to bullshit, and I kind of just said what I was thinking, diplomatically, but still. And if I'm being honest, if you are sitting here trying to win your games, and look, I'm not the best player I know. I've got plenty of room to grow, but sometimes you have to either accept that your army, if you want to build an army that is fluffy or super Johnny-ish, list building kind of niche-y and techy like I like to do, you have to be either okay with the fact that if you haven't built into battle tactics, you're setting yourself up to lose. And remember, losing just takes like losing by 1 point. I actually had a number of recent games where I literally lost by one battle tactic, and that was mainly just my fault. I could have totally gotten in. I just wasn't familiar enough with what I was doing. But that can make a big difference. So you either have to be okay with losing, because not getting your battle tactics, I should say, which could very well result in losing, just so you can play with the toys you want to play with. And maybe that's not where you get your enjoyment from, is from winning. But I think all of us on some level, especially the ones listening to this video, probably do want to win at the end of the day, in addition to using their fun toys. The other side of this, if-then kind of scenario here is maybe the other side would be you play in a meta with your friends where no one's really building for specific battle tactics, or you guys You could choose, of course, not to play with battle tactics, but that's totally evading this video. But you guys are kind of similarly disadvantaged. Like Nurgle and Stormcast both got those battle tactics recently because they both had a hard time with them. Khorne sometimes has a hard time, especially if they don't take Be'lakor as their one wizard that can do magical dominance. And so if you're playing someone that's kind of evenly matched with you in that case, then you don't necessarily have to build for the battle tactics as much because you've got bad battle tactics or whatever. So, and then maybe it feels more like a fair fight. But that's me being kind of keeping it real. Obviously, you should just have fun. It's Warhammer. It's a game. But if you really are trying to like go to the next level, as I am actively trying to do right now, this is one of those things you just kind of have to accept, I think. So anyway, pep talk over. Real talk Ryan time over. And that's all I got for today. So went on a little longer than I thought it was going to go on, but I hope you guys find this interesting or useful. Let me know if you think I'm totally wrong about this stuff, but my experience thus far suggests that this is pretty neutral ground here. But anyway, thanks guys. I'll get another video out. The goal is to like look at some books and maybe some list building itself, where with different armies, we try to look at what they've got. And the ones that I'm actually familiar with, which means we'll mostly be talking about Order and maybe Tzeentch. But trying to look at some battle tactics, and then how you would rate those things, like given an actual list. Like maybe taking account of what your battle tactics could be, writing a list, and then after you've written that list, then doing that matrix, But anyway, in the meantime, thanks for listening again. Thanks, guys. I hope we can get back into the groove of things here. We've got lots of tournaments to catch up on. And feel free to like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Join the Discord in the comment section below. All right, guys. Until the next time, Ryan out.